Have you ever felt like you see too much? Not just visually, but emotionally, spiritually, like your mind stretches beyond what others are willing to see, and that very clarity becomes a burden. Throughout history, brilliant minds have been cast aside, not because they were wrong, but because they saw what others were not ready to confront. Socrates was sentenced to death for asking too many questions. Galileo was imprisoned for looking at the stars and telling the truth. Tesla died in a small hotel room, alone, forgotten, not because they failed, but because they disturbed the illusion. The world doesn't reject intelligence, it rejects discomfort. It recoils not at logic, but at what logic reveals. The fragile scaffolding holding up our so-called truths, the shadows behind the polished surface, and so silence becomes a refuge, not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of wisdom. The kind of silence that comes from knowing too much, from speaking too clearly, from having your words drowned in noise, or worse, met with hollow stares. You begin to learn, truth spoken too soon is seen as a threat. Insight, without permission, is labeled arrogance. Wisdom, when shared in the wrong room, becomes loneliness. So the lucid mind grows quiet, not because it lacks something to say, but because it has already tried and failed. Not in substance, but in timing, in delivery, in audience. There is a special kind of loneliness that visits the intelligent, not the loneliness of distance, but the loneliness of depth. You walk into rooms and feel the shallowness pressing on your skin like a suit that doesn't fit. You speak carefully, but your words are heavy, and they land with a thud, unrecognized, uninvited, unwelcome. So you withdraw. You don't stop thinking. You stop sharing. Not out of fear, but because you've seen what happens when you don't. The world is full of noise, loud opinions, quick judgments, performative passion, but behind the curtain, few are truly listening. Fewer still are ready to hear something that challenges their comfort. So what does the lucid mind do? It adapts. It speaks less and watches more. It chooses its moments, its people, its battles, but inside it still aches, not for attention, but for connection, for that rare encounter where masks fall away and two minds meet in the quiet. A mind that sees the world too clearly is not celebrated, it is feared, because to see is to unsettle, to know is to disturb, and the world prefers a beautiful lie to a painful truth. So the intelligent learn to wear masks, not of deception, but of protection. They smile in shallow conversations. They nod at ideas they no longer believe in. They shrink themselves to avoid waking those who prefer to sleep. It is not cowardice, it is strategy, because truth, when given too freely, becomes a weapon, and the world doesn't hesitate to aim it back at you. This is the silent curse of the lucid mind. It's not the weight of knowledge itself, but the loneliness that follows, the distance it creates, the echo it leaves in rooms that never understood you, the hunger for something more. Not more attention, but more depth, more truth, more realness. And yet, it is in this silence that something begins to grow. A kind of strength, a deeper listening, a wiser presence. Because when the world stops hearing you, you begin to hear yourself. And that voice, quiet as it may be, carries the power to change everything. There's something unsettling about being around someone who sees clearly. You feel exposed, not because they judge, but because they reflect. Deep thinkers don't just share ideas. They act as mirrors. They reveal the things you hide from others and from yourself, and that's terrifying. Most people can handle power, wealth, even beauty in others. They might feel envy, maybe admiration, but they don't feel personally attacked. Intellectual depth is different. It penetrates. It reaches into the spaces most people work so hard to ignore. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when you speak a little too honestly, ask a question a little too deep, and suddenly the room changes. The air grows still. Eyes look away. Someone changes the subject. Laughter covers the discomfort. They weren't expecting a mirror, and they weren't ready to look. You didn't mean to confront anyone. You were just being, existing in your truth. But truth, even in silence, can be loud. And the more deeply you think, the more loudly your presence echoes, without you saying a word. The lucid mind carries a frequency that not everyone is tuned to receive. So when they hear it, it distorts everything they believe about themselves. Not because you told them they were wrong, but because, by simply thinking differently, you made them question their own reflections. This is the mirror effect. It's not about superiority, it's not arrogance, it's simply awareness. And awareness, when shared too openly, becomes confrontation. The deep thinker then becomes dangerous, not because they harm, but because they reveal. And revelation is painful. It threatens the comfort zones, the tidy stories, the unquestioned assumptions. It shatters illusions, and illusions are what keep most people afloat. So you find yourself walking carefully, choosing your words like stepping through glass. You smile, nod, simplify your thoughts, not to deceive, but to survive. Because you've learned honesty has a cost, and not everyone is willing to pay. The mirror you carry, you start to cover it, wrap it in small talk, distract from it with humor, dim it just enough so it doesn't blind. But inside, you know, you're hiding a light, a truth, a clarity that could free others, if only they were ready to see. And still, you wonder, should I dim myself forever? Should I stay silent to keep others comfortable? Or is there a way to hold the mirror gently, wisely, without breaking those who gaze into it? That question follows you like a shadow. And the answer is not simple, because not everyone deserves your truth. But someone out there does. Someone is searching for a mirror that finally reflects who they really are. And for them, you must remain whole, even if the world flinches at your light. Let's pause for a moment and ask the question most never dare to voice. Why does intelligence unsettle people more than power, wealth, or even beauty? The answer lies in something primal, deep, buried inside our minds. Power can intimidate, wealth can inspire jealousy, beauty can create awe, but intelligence threatens identity because it questions what we believe about ourselves. And belief is fragile. When someone stronger enters a room, we may feel smaller, but we still know who we are. When someone richer arrives, we may feel poorer, but we don't feel broken. But when someone thinks deeper, sees further, challenges the way we interpret the world, we feel shaken, not just externally, but internally. It's like a tremor under your sense of self. It rattles your foundations, and we're not taught how to deal with that. So instead of being curious, we become defensive. Instead of leaning in, we pull away. It's not about logic, it's about ego. The mind's survival instinct kicks in. Protect the identity, defend the story, preserve the illusion, and the deep thinker becomes the threat. Not because they attacked anyone, but because they disrupted the narrative. Our brains evolved to keep us safe in groups. In ancient times, being cast out meant death. So acceptance became survival. And anything that disrupted group harmony was rejected. Now, thousands of years later, that programming still runs. When someone intelligent speaks truth, when they say something that cracks the social mask, it doesn't just trigger thought. It triggers fear, biological fear. Neuroscience shows that when people feel intellectually inferior, their brains light up in the same areas that respond to physical danger. Let that sink in. Thinking deeply can activate the same alarm bells as a predator in the dark. This is why nuance is met with suspicion, why truth-tellers are seen as dangerous, why silence often feels safer than clarity. You're not imagining it. You're not being dramatic. The world was not built to reward depth. It was built to reward comfort. So when your thoughts begin to shake foundations, don't be surprised when the walls push back. But here's the secret. This isn't a reason to stop thinking. It's a reason to start thinking strategically. Because while intelligence may be feared, it is also the quiet force that reshapes the world. And the world, whether it admits it or not, needs the minds that dare to disturb it. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when you offer something real, a thought that came from the deep, and the room just shuts down. Eyes glaze over. Someone clears their throat. The topic changes. A laugh too loud fills the silence like a curtain, and you're left holding your truth like a gift no one wanted to unwrap. It's subtle. No one yells. No one calls you wrong. They simply withdraw. And that silence speaks louder than words ever could. This is not random. It's not just bad timing. It's a mechanism, an ancient one, a psychological reflex buried deep in the collective mind. When you say something that pierces the surface, that threatens the carefully curated balance of the group, people recoil, not out of cruelty, but out of preservation. Because what you offer, even if wrapped in care, is a disruption. And humans are wired to avoid disruption. They want flow, agreement, consensus, comfort, truth. That's dangerous, because truth rearranges. It tears things down before it builds. It makes people look at things they've spent their whole lives avoiding. So when you introduce a deep idea into a casual space, you're not just saying something, you're cracking a surface. And most people will do anything to keep that surface smooth. They'll change the subject, laugh it off, label you as too intense, or worse, pretend they didn't hear you at all. And you leave the conversation feeling like a stranger in your own skin. Not because you were wrong, but because you spoke a different language, the language of truth, and no one had the ears to hear it. So what do? You begin to measure your words. You scan the room before speaking. You weigh the cost of honesty. You learn to translate your depth into something lighter, safer, smaller. And with each compromise, a part of you dims. Not because you're becoming less, but because the world keeps asking you to be less. That's how rejection works when you're a deep thinker. It's rarely loud, it's quiet, social, polite. It's in the look that says, that's a bit much. It's in the smile that says, let's not go there. It's in the silence that says, speak like everyone else. This is the invisible rejection mechanism. It doesn't attack you, it reshapes you. Slowly, subtly, until you start censoring yourself before others even get the chance. You begin to play along. You nod to things you disagree with. You laugh when nothing is funny. You hide your real questions behind safe answers. And somewhere along the way, you begin to forget what your voice sounded like before you learned to make it acceptable. But the truth is, you were never too much. They were simply not ready, not equipped, not willing. And maybe they're not supposed to be. Not every room is made for depth. Not every conversation is sacred ground. Not every person can walk where your mind wanders. But here's what you must remember. Your thoughts are not a burden. Your clarity is not a flaw. Your silence is not weakness. It's strategy, because the world doesn't need you to speak all the time. It needs you to know when to speak and who to speak to. And when you find that space, that rare soul who doesn't flinch when the truth arrives, that moment when someone listens all the way through, that sacred pause where no one interrupts your depth, you'll remember why you kept thinking, why you kept feeling, why you stayed different, because rejection isn't always a wall. Sometimes it's a compass, and it's pointing you toward those who were never going to reject you at all. The world has a strange way of choosing its messengers. It gives the microphone to the loud, the charming, the certain, even when their words are empty, or worse, misleading. Meanwhile, the ones who whisper truths are often left unheard. Because charisma is seductive, it sparkles, it entertains, it makes people feel good about themselves. But truth, real truth, doesn't always feel good. It's inconvenient. It asks for change. It invites discomfort. And in a world addicted to quick pleasure and fast answers, discomfort is the enemy. So the world celebrates those who smile with confidence, who speak in absolutes, who offer easy answers wrapped in pretty packaging. These are the ones who go viral, who fill stadiums, who trend on social media, not because they're wise, but because they know how to say what people want to hear. They promise certainty, hope, control. But you don't promise. You question. You peel back layers. You say, it's not that simple. And that's why you're overlooked. Because nuance doesn't trend, complexity doesn't sell, and the inconvenient truth will always lose to the comfortable illusion at first. But don't mistake the spotlight for truth. Don't confuse applause with alignment. Don't believe that popularity equals depth. Some of the greatest liars in history were excellent speakers. Some of the most dangerous ideas were spoken with charm. Some of the darkest manipulations were dressed in smiles. And some of the truest voices spoke in solitude. Because truth doesn't scream. It doesn't dance for attention. It waits. It waits for the rare soul who's willing to sit in silence long enough to hear it, who's brave enough to be uncomfortable, who's strong enough to admit, I was wrong. You see, charisma draws a crowd, but truth changes hearts. Not quickly, not loudly, but deeply. And depth is slow. So what does this mean for the thinker? For the one who sees too much, feels too much, questions too much? It means you must not compare your voice to those who are simply louder. You must not feel lesser because your truth doesn't echo through crowds. You must not measure your worth by the reaction of those who are addicted to shallow pleasures. Because while they entertain, you awaken. While they distract, you reveal. While they comfort, you confront. And that confrontation, though painful, is sacred. Because only those willing to be shaken can ever be rebuilt. So yes, the world will celebrate those with shiny confidence and loud certainty. But when the noise fades, when the lights dim, when the echo of charisma disappears into silence, truth remains, still, unmoving, undeniable, and those who once laughed at it may one day return to it with tears in their eyes and humility in their hearts. Your role isn't to entertain the many. It's to reach the few who are ready, to speak with depth even when met with silence, to carry the torch of truth even when no one is watching, because eventually someone will see the light and they'll thank you, not for being charismatic, but for being real. Why does intelligence feel like a threat? Not just to power, but to the ordinary, the familiar, the everyday mind that craves stability more than truth. To understand that we must leave philosophy for a moment and step into biology. Because the rejection of deep thought isn't always conscious. It's often chemical, instinctive, old. When you say something that challenges belief, the brain hears danger, not because you're dangerous, but because what you say endangers the narrative. And humans, above all, cling to narrative. To make sense of the chaos, our minds build stories, simple, clean, comforting. These stories help us survive. I know who I am. I know how the world works. This is how things should be. And when someone like you comes along and says, look deeper, maybe that's not true, the brain doesn't just pause. It panics. It lights up the amygdala, the same part that activates when we face a snake, a cliff, a loaded gun. Studies show that when people are made to feel intellectually inferior, their brains react the same way they would to physical threats. Fight, flight, freeze, and this explains everything. It explains the laughter that isn't real, the sarcasm that cuts too deep, the silence that grows too loud. It explains why people walk away when the conversation gets real. They're not trying to be cruel, they're trying to be safe, because the mind defends itself, not just from pain, but from complexity. It prefers the path of least resistance, the story that costs less energy, the idea that fits like a puzzle piece, not one that cracks the whole frame. This is called cognitive ease, the brain's tendency to favor what's simple, familiar, repeatable. When your thoughts arrive wrapped in nuance, when they carry paradox or provoke reflection, they don't feel safe. They feel hard, and the brain says, "No, thank you." It chooses the comfortable lie over the disruptive truth, the shallow agreement over the deep challenge. And that's not a moral failure, it's evolution. For most of human history, survival didn't depend on who was right, but on who belonged. To the tribe, to the norm, to the rhythm of the group. The outsider, no matter how wise, was a threat. Not because of his words, but because of what his words threatened to change. Change meant unpredictability. Unpredictability meant danger. And danger meant extinction. So now, thousands of years later, our brains still remember, still react, still protect the story, even when that story no longer serves us. And that's why intelligence feels dangerous, because it isn't just a new idea. It's a new map, a new terrain, a new way of seeing. And the old map burns. It's not your fault that others resist you. It's not a sign you're broken. It's not even personal. It's the system, biological, social, cultural. It's the nervous system whispering, stay safe, stay small, don't question, don't think too much. And yet you do. You think, you question. You see, which means you will always walk a different path, not by choice, but by design. The world wasn't made to welcome the thinker. It was made to reward the agreeable, the charismatic, the predictable. But here's the irony. The same brain that fears intelligence also longs for it. We ache for understanding. We hunger for clarity. We yearn for someone to name what we can't explain. And when we find it, when we meet someone whose words resonate so deeply they feel like memory, we weep. Not because they gave us something new, but because they gave us back something we forgot. So keep thinking, keep seeing, keep speaking. Even if the world flinches, even if the room falls silent, even if no one claps, because one day, someone's brain will light up not in fear, but in recognition. And they'll finally say, there you are. There is a silence that only the wise know. A kind of stillness that grows around those who see too much, who feel too deeply, who ask questions no one wants to answer. It doesn't begin in arrogance. It begins in wonder. The child who stares at the stars, who asks why a little too often, who sees patterns others overlook, and slowly, the distance begins, not physical, not obvious, but emotional, spiritual, a quiet realization. I don't see the world the way they do. And the more you grow, the more you notice. Conversations feel shallow, laughter sounds rehearsed, connections feel thin, like paper stretched over something hollow. So you start to shrink, not your mind, but your presence. You learn to blend, to smile when you're aching, to nod when your thoughts are screaming, because being seen doesn't always feel safe. And being understood, that feels like a luxury you stopped expecting. Because the truth is, genius is lonely. Not because it wants to be, but because it has nowhere to go. Where do you place a soul that doesn't fit? The world wasn't built for thinkers. It was built for function, for efficiency, for belonging. It rewards the agreeable, the consistent, the ones who never ask, is there more? And the ones who do become dangerous. They become outliers, misfits, troublemakers. But they are also the architects of evolution, because everything that has ever moved humanity forward began in the mind of someone who didn't belong, someone who walked alone, questioned the rules, and dared to think differently. But make no mistake, they paid a price. Isolation isn't romantic. It's heavy, it's cold. It's the weight of hearing silence after offering your soul to the room. It's the ache of realizing that brilliance doesn't attract applause. It often invites exile. And so, you stop reaching. Not because you don't crave connection, but because your heart can only take so much rejection before it folds into itself. But here's the truth they don't tell you. Loneliness is not proof that you are wrong. It's proof that you are rare. The higher the frequency of your thoughts, the fewer minds that can receive them. It's not arrogance, it's resonance. Your mind is a language only a few are fluent in, and that's okay. You weren't meant for everyone. You were meant for those who can meet you in the silence, who can stand in the depth without needing to resurface right away. And until they find you, you wait. But don't stop thinking. Don't stop feeling. Don't stop reaching into the mystery and pulling back meaning. Because someone, somewhere, is searching too. And your solitude is the signal. The signal that you're walking ahead of your time. That you're not lost, you're just early. And one day, when the world is ready, your thoughts will no longer echo in emptiness. They'll become a bridge. And the ones who once looked away will look to you for the way forward. Because genius is not just the ability to see what others can't. It's the courage to keep seeing even when no one else understands. So if you find yourself alone in your thoughts, don't curse the distance. Bless it. Because in that space, truth is still alive. And one day, it will find a voice through you. Look back, not just at history, but at the souls who tried to change it. What do you see? Not celebration, not gratitude, not statues and fame. You see exile, prisons, silence. You see the cost of seeing too soon. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, was sentenced to death not for violence, but for asking questions. He invited people to think for themselves, to examine their beliefs, to stop repeating what they were told. And for that, he was forced to drink poison. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right too early. Galileo looked through a telescope and told the world the Earth moved around the sun, and the world, more precisely those in power, called him a heretic. He was imprisoned, his books banned, his discoveries denied. He didn't die in chains, he died in isolation. And yet, we now teach his truth in every school. Nikola Tesla dreamed of wireless energy, free and infinite. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a visionary. But the powerful weren't ready. Because free energy didn't fit the business model, so he was shut down, discredited, forgotten. He died alone in a hotel room, while others built empires on the echoes of his work. Alan Turing cracked the uncrackable. His mind helped end a world war. He pioneered the logic that birthed modern computing, but society didn't thank him. It destroyed him, not for what he built, but for who he was. And the pressure, the shame, the isolation, it took his life. Only decades later did the world say thank you, but by then the silence had already won. And it wasn't just men. Hypatia of Alexandria, a brilliant woman in a world ruled by men and fear, was a philosopher, a mathematician, an astronomer. She taught logic. She asked people to think. She dared to exist outside the rules, and for that, a mob tore her from her carriage and ended her life with stones and fire. She wasn't a warrior, she was a thinker, and even that was too much. You begin to see the pattern, don't you? The thinkers, the visionaries, the ones who stepped outside the line. They weren't celebrated in their time. They were resisted, mocked, feared, because their ideas threatened the foundations. Their presence disturbed the comfort. Their clarity unsettled the illusion. They weren't just rejected, they were sacrificed. And only after they were gone, only once their truth no longer posed a threat, did we call them geniuses. Why? Because the world doesn't embrace vision when it's raw. It only loves it in hindsight, once it's safe, once it's marketable, once it no longer asks us to change. This is not bitterness, it's recognition. Recognition that if you are thinking deeply today, If your thoughts shake the walls around you, you are not alone. You are walking a path many have walked. And though it feels lonely now, it is sacred, because it is yours, and it leads somewhere beautiful. One day, your truth may become someone else's foundation. Your voice may echo in someone else's courage. Your ideas, ignored today, may awaken generations not yet born. But that day isn't today. Not yet. Today, you may be misunderstood. You may be silenced. You may be called difficult, arrogant, dangerous. And still, you must keep going. Because every thinker who came before you once stood where you are now, at the edge of understanding, with no applause, no safety net, only a torch burning quietly in the dark. They kept it lit, so now it's yours to carry, even if no one else sees the light. Yet, Arthur Schopenhauer didn't romanticize intelligence. He didn't call it a gift. He called it a burden. While others wrote about wisdom as a path to joy, Schopenhauer wrote about it as a path to suffering. Not because truth is wrong, but because seeing too clearly makes life too real. To him, the world wasn't a puzzle to be solved. It was a wound, bleeding endlessly from the illusion of meaning. And those who saw this, they suffered the most. He believed that most people live not by reason, but by what he called the blind will, an unconscious, irrational force that drives human behavior. People chase pleasure, flee discomfort, build routines to numb the question, why? But the thinker, the truly lucid mind, does not chase blindly. They pause, they see, they ask, and in doing so, they suffer. Because once you understand the patterns behind human nature, you stop believing in appearances. You see the masks, the lies, the constant performance of identity, and it becomes harder to play along. You walk through conversations and hear what's not being said. You see the ego behind the compliment, the fear behind the smile, the emptiness behind the noise. And what once made you laugh now makes you ache, not out of arrogance, but out of grief. Because when you see the truth behind the curtain, you realize how much pretending holds the world together. You realize most people aren't living, they're escaping, running from silence, from stillness, from themselves. Schopenhauer saw this not as a flaw in individuals, but as a design in nature. The world, to him, was not a place of harmony, but of tension, desire, conflict. He said the more one understands the nature of existence, the less they can participate in it blindly. And that clarity, that brutal clarity, isolates. Because how do you explain to someone that their dreams are built on illusions? How do you share joy when your joy has been replaced by awareness? You become quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because truth becomes heavy. Too heavy for small talk, too heavy for fragile egos, too heavy for the speed of modern life. And so, you retreat into books, into solitude, into the safe spaces where masks can fall and silence can speak. Schopenhauer didn't see this as defeat. He saw it as refuge. He believed that solitude was not a punishment, but a privilege, the place where true thinkers heal, where they create, reflect, reclaim themselves from the noise. He urged thinkers not to shout into deaf ears, but to speak in places that could hear, to choose their words as carefully as they choose their company, because not every truth is ready for the world, and not every world deserves your truth. He believed the greatest minds were not found in courts or crowds, but in quiet corners, writing what no one else had the courage to feel. And while others chased ambition, power, pleasure, the thinker chased understanding, even if that understanding brought pain. Because for Schopenhauer, pain wasn't the enemy, illusion was. To live in ignorance was, for him, a greater suffering than solitude. And so he walked alone, not bitter, but awake, aware of the price of clarity, willing to pay it. And perhaps you feel that too, that tension between wanting connection and fearing the dilution of your depth, that hunger for realness in a world that feeds you roles instead of souls. If so, you are not broken, you are lucid. And lucidity, though lonely, is sacred. Because once you've seen the world clearly, you cannot unsee it. You cannot pretend, you cannot return to sleep. And maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe the point is not to feel good, but to feel everything, until feeling itself becomes a kind of wisdom. And from that wisdom, you begin to speak again. Not loudly, not for everyone, but for those who, like you, walk the same path and need to know they're not alone in the dark. So now what? You've seen too much, felt too much, thought too deeply, and the world, as it is, doesn't seem to have a place for minds like yours. Do you shrink? Do you pretend? Do you simplify your thoughts until they fit inside someone else's comfort? No, you adapt. You become wise, because the goal is not to silence your depth, it's to protect it, to carry it like a candle through the wind, with both hands, shielding it from those who would blow it out simply because they don't understand fire. You don't need to speak your truth in every room. Not every room deserves it. Not every mind is ready. Not every heart is open, and that's okay. Wisdom is not pouring out your soul indiscriminately. Wisdom is knowing when to speak, how to speak, and to whom. So protect your inner world. Treat it like a sacred garden. Let very few people walk there, and only those who come with reverence. Speak your truth where it can land, where it can grow, where it can matter. And when you find those rare souls who don't flinch at your honesty, who don't shut down when you go too deep, who meet your silence with silence instead of filling it with noise, keep them, because they are your mirrors, your companions, your proof that you're not alone in this strange, shallow world. But also, learn the art of stillness, of sitting with your own thoughts without needing to perform them. Let solitude become sanctuary, not sentence. Let it shape you, not shatter you. Use your depth to create, not just to observe, to write, to build, to paint, to question, to plant seeds for a future you may never see, but someone else will harvest. You don't have to change the world today, but you do have to protect your light long enough for the world to catch up. You are not here to be liked. You are here to illuminate. And light often burns before it warms. So learn the rhythm of your own soul. Move at the pace of meaning. Let the world spin fast. You stay rooted. Let others chase trends. You chase truth. And when it gets heavy, because it will, remember that you are not alone in this. There are others like you, hidden in plain sight, walking quietly through crowded rooms, thinking thoughts that echo yours. You are not a mistake. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are awake in a world still sleeping. And the world will resist you, reject you, try to reshape you, but do not fold. You were not made to blend. You were made to see. And that seeing, though heavy, is the beginning of everything.